So it's great that I have Michael here with me today. Thanks a lot for doing this interview, Michael.
Not at all, Ken.
So Michael, you just came off from a panel discussion with Tony from Wind Mobile and other experts. What's your take on the session itself, briefly?
I think, number one thing probably everybody agrees on is, even with the recent court decision on foreign ownership, there's incredible uncertainty as to what the rules are in this country. And for all of us, in terms of how we invest, what the future business is about, where our competition is coming, it's a critical question that has to be resolved once and for all. So I think everybody was on that starting point. Obviously, some people believe that if you remove the foreign ownership restrictions, it creates a lot of cultural difficulties. We don't. We believe you don't have to remove the ownership restrictions on broadcasters, but do on carriers, whether they're cable carriers, wireless carriers, ISPs, telephone companies. It's all becoming the same pipe, and it's all the carriage of bits. And particularly in a world that's supposed to be technology neutral, net neutral, the idea that some bits on a carrier pipe are regulated under one act and some under the other, in terms of their carriage, makes no sense. What you really want is total neutrality when it comes to bits, and if you have total neutrality as your principle, then you don't have to worry who owns the pipe.
With respect to the the recent federal court decision where Wind Mobile won and Telus and Mobility lost, from what you know, is Telus going to appeal it to Supreme Court? Based on what I read in the newspaper, I thought you guys are going to decide.
Public Mobile was the main player in that. I've heard they're going to. We're still looking at it, but it is an uncertain case because all it said was that the minister, in arriving at his decision, took all the appropriate procedural steps. But what it doesn't say is, does the outcome, the ownership structure, actually conform with Canada's foreign ownership laws? And if so, why?
But that's a different ruling, though, is that right? Like no, that is not under dispute?
That's the fundamental issue that led to all the disputes before the CRTC, before the courts, was that Wind at the time, Globalive, had one shareholder, so Oris come from Egypt, that had 65% of the equity and 98% of the debt. That's like control of 80% of the capital structure, but they didn't control voting shares.
Yeah, they were using the voting shares to differentiate and making sure the control ownership is.
I mean, we've got the government saying one of the steps in liberalization, what if we only took it to 49%? Well, this is way beyond 49% to begin with. So what are the rules? I think everybody would like to know what are the rules. The Federal Court of Appeal gave no clarity on that because all they focused on was whether the process, the steps that were taken were appropriate as opposed to whether the conclusion reached was legal. That's a big difference.
Right. So you think Telus is going to be definitely supporting this appeal and filing a Friends of the Court paper?
I don't know.
If it's
at this point, our key focus really in the summer is first and foremost on ensuring that there's safeguards in terms of vertical integration. The second focus is obviously the policies around the spectrum auctions that are coming up. They're tied to foreign ownership, and we've already said, and have said many times, that we would support the removal of the foreign ownership restrictions as long as it's done for everybody at the same time, and as long as that includes cable distribution, because of our point, voice, video, and data, it's all going over the same pipe, and you can't regulate or treat the carriage of that differently. You can make decisions in the cable world as a broadcast regulator about whether you can carry HBO Canada or HBO US, those kind of decisions. And you can do those whether the carrier is foreign owned or not. So that's our critical focus. We'll keep reading the decision, but there's a lot of other stuff going on, and at the end of the day, all we're asking the government to do is change the rules fairly and equally for everybody. Because this is a decision that's going to impact us for a long time in the future, and you can't make it based on short-run policy issues about whether one particular carrier or two needs access to more foreign capital or not.
So speaking about spectrum auction, the government hasn't decided on the date and the format and
no, we're not even sure if maybe, because of the new minister, things have slowed down. We were pleased to hear he said, there's got to be balance, there's got to be recognition about the companies that invest, as well as just focus on price. And that's an important point. So, and again, in the auction, we're taking a position that basically says you can achieve a lot of what you want to do with auction caps that ensure that nobody can own more than X percent of the spectrum, and you'll guarantee that there's multiple winners, not just from amongst the incumbents.
So some new entrants and some Canadians actually have complained that the big telcos have auctioned and hold a lot of frequency spectrum and actually not use them and basically stockpiling them, is their words.
Yeah,
so what's Telus take on it, and would you support the government actually changing the rules?
The only spectrum that we had in reserve was the AWS auction spectrum, which we're now rolling out as we talk. In cities across the country.
So you're rolling out now, like 20?
Yeah, we're sure going to be in markets in 2012. Whether we get in any in 2011, we're not guaranteeing. We said 2012 is our date, but we're already, we're talking to vendors. We're putting up towers, and the reason for that is because with the shift to broadband, we're seeing a 16 times multiple in terms of the amount of capacity a customer uses. And our networks are full. We have our HSPA network, busiest network in the world according to Huawei, who helped build it. And that's because it's 90% smartphone and tablet. It's mobile broadband is fundamentally different, has different dynamics than the voice market. And that's why you need more spectrum. We've got 7 million customers, and they're already using up the capacity we have. That's why we're moving to LTE. So we're not warehousing. Remember, unlike some of the other incumbents, we hold no spectrum at 2,500. They hold well over 100 megahertz. So that's the critical difference.
So from Telus' perspective, since you guys are going to use up the already warehoused frequency in hopefully this year or by 2012,
we're beginning to build this year. So we're talking about going to market.
So you wouldn't actually oppose to the idea if the government say, if you want to auction or bid on the new frequency spectrum, one of the requirements is you have to have used up or committed funds to use your existing warehouse frequency, and that wouldn't.
We don't have a problem. We've already been in and shown the government of Canada, Industry Canada, where we're using the spectrum, where we're at capacity, what our future plans are. So they know that we're not warehousing any spectrum. So that rule, if it was in place, wouldn't mean anything for us because it wouldn't impact us. This isn't a Canadian situation. Cisco, Ericsson, all the big vendors have seen this shift as you start running video over your tablets and your smartphones, and they're always on, they're always signaling you, they're always updating data. There has been a J-curve shift like this in terms of capacity consumption. It's why regimes all around the world are calling for more and more spectrum to be put into play, because you can't do super fast LTE mobile broadband if you don't have really wide swaths of spectrum to support the broadband demand. Otherwise, you get what happened with AT&T in the States when they were the only iPhone provider and offering unlimited data. All that caused was their networks to crash. So we are constrained by the laws of physics, and that's not going to change. But you're quite right. Nobody should be sitting on spectrum for prolonged periods of time. I don't have any problem. problem with that at all.
So speaking about price, I mean, in the last few years, there's and around the world, there are telcos that some would argue overbid and overpaid for the frequency spectrum, and they're in financial difficulties as a result. Do you see what kind of money, I guess, is Telus willing to bid in the new frequency spectrum?
That's
not your department.
I can tell you in the AWS auction that because they did this set aside and the distortions it caused because one side was able to bid up the other and the other side wasn't able to respond. The estimate is we paid about 40% more than the U.S. paid for similar spectrum, which was unimaginable because
good for Canadians, though, right? Give to the taxpayers.
Well, no, it's not really. It's not really because the taxpayers, probably got about $2 billion extra. That money, though, didn't go into the communications industry. It really got pumped into the bailout of the auto industry. And money, the $2 billion.
So you're pitching about auto industry.
Yeah. So money that could have been used to build more towers to roll out infrastructure faster for everybody, because even the new entrants overpaid. We just overpaid more. $2 billion that could have gone to building more towers, rolling out networks, getting to LTE faster.
So you'd rather see the government
really went to a couple of auto companies. So
you'd rather see
the policy? I don't think so.
The funds go into, the auction raised funds to go into, at least part of it goes to telecom related
well, if you don't
infrastructure.
Overpay, then you're going to, when you overpay, you have less money to build. Because you still have to ultimately.
Well, yeah, put it this way.
Business.
Yeah, you guys don't have to overpay, right? You can let someone else win.
Even if we did that, then we don't have the spectrum to drive out the next generation of broadband.
That means you think it's worth that money, right?
Well, it's worth what you pay for until you stop paying. But if we're going to walk away from the auction, then because things they distorted it again, then I would suggest there would be very few people left at the table. And certainly, probably a lot of people would be outpriced. You got to price it right. The goal is not to raise the maximum amount of money. The goal of the government is to, in their view, to increase competition, and they've also said to ensure that infrastructure is built out not just in a couple of urban centers, but rural across the country. And that's what we do. That's what we proved we did with our new network. And that's what we plan to do with LTE if we get 700 spectrum. So we're hoping that we're hoping for a balanced decision. We're not saying all or nothing to the government like some carriers. We're saying there are ways to do it to ensure multiple winners, and that's probably the correct course. And then let's move on and upgrade what are considered to be some of the best networks now in the world. Let's upgrade them again.
All right.
Stay ahead of the curve.
So one final plug for Telus.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Michael.
Okay, Kempton. Good to see you.